A lot of Chicago Bears fans want Ryan Poles to trade down from the 9th overall pick and acquire more draft capital. The problem is, the teams that would want to move up to number 9 want the same players the Chicago Bears do.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today, and especially today, because today is my birthday. And there's nothing I wanted more for my birthday than for you to tune in to Locked On Bears. So thanks for tuning in today, and hopefully every single day. On the show today, we're going to dive into trade situations for the Chicago Bears with the 9th overall pick, looking at the main obstacles that come in between the Bears and a trade. But then we'll look at, okay, what kind of compensation could they get if a team is willing to move up to the 9th overall pick? What would that look like if the Bears move down a couple of spots versus a handful of spots versus a big drop down? And at each of those spots, we're going to look at what prospects could still be there for the Bears, like essentially the players they might still target if they traded down from the 9th overall pick. But I want to start with what I see as the biggest obstacle in the way for a potential Bears trade, that the players that the Bears are after are the same players that a lot of other teams are after. And that if a team is willing to move up to number 9 for a player, a lot of the time in this draft, it's going to be a player the Chicago Bears would want anyway. To me, as you look at the first 8 picks before the Bears pick at 9, we talked about this a lot yesterday on the podcast, looking at how one of the wide receivers could make it to the 9th overall pick. If you just go through the first 8 picks in this draft, we're expecting 4 of those 8 picks to be quarterbacks, including the Bears and Caleb Williams, and then perhaps 3 other quarterbacks going in the top 8. We expect at least 2 of those 8 picks to be wide receivers, probably Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors, but you could never know for sure what order. So that would count for 6 of the first 8 picks. If that's in some order, 6 of the first 8 picks go there, that would leave 2 other spots that need to be filled, presumably by some combination of Notre Dame left tackle Joe Alt, Alabama edge rusher Dallas Turner, or a 3rd wide receiver, probably Washington wide receiver Rome Odunze. Basically, the Chicago Bears are guaranteed to get one of those 3 guys. If 4 quarterbacks and 2 wide receivers also go in the top 8, one of those 3, Alt, Turner, or Odunze, should be there when the Chicago Bears are on the clock with the 9th overall pick. The Bears could use any of those 3 players, and any of those 3 players would be great selections for the Bears with the 9th pick. The Bears need an edge rusher opposite Montez Sweat. The Bears could use a franchise left tackle in Joe Alt, and they could use a young stud wide receiver to match with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen and develop in the long term to take over for Keenan Allen in that spot. The Bears could easily justify taking any of those 3 players with the 9th overall pick. Those are also, though, the players that teams would want to trade up for to the 9th overall pick. I'm not sure there's another prospect in this draft that a team would say, hey, I really need to get to the number 9 pick to make sure that I get them. The one player that is the closest, I think, to that conversation is the Iowa cornerback, Cooper DeJean. Actually, I don't know if it's DeJean or DeJean. I've heard it both ways. But the Iowa cornerback is kind of considered the number 1 corner in this draft, and he could be in that conversation that a team could trade up for him. And I suppose Georgia tight end Brock Bowers could be in that conversation, but there are other cornerbacks in this draft. I'm not sure if teams are going to be desperate to get to number 9 to get him when you could take Quinyon Mitchell from Toledo, or maybe Nate Wiggins from Clemson, or Terrion Arnold from Alabama. Like, they're not all, you might have them in some order, but like there's not as big of a gulf there as there is between the top wide receivers and the next tier of wide receivers. And Joe Alt as an offensive tackle versus some of the next offensive tackles. And Dallas Turner as an edge rusher. Like, it's the number one edge rusher in the draft, the number one left tackle in the draft, and then one of the top tier wide receivers in this draft. Those are the premium blue chip players in the top 10 that if they make it to 9, that's who teams would want to move up for. And there are plenty of teams picking in the teens and early 20s that need some combination of a wide receiver, an offensive tackle, or edge rusher. There are some teams in that range that need a cornerback, but again, I'm not sure that the cornerback class here screams, I got to trade up to get the top guy. There's a lot of different flavors of cornerbacks in this draft, in that range of the draft, that I don't think you need to move up for. I mean, and is a team going to trade up for Brock Bowers? Never say never, but I feel like if I'm picking in 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, like I think Bowers might fall more to that range. I don't have to trade up to 9 to get him. So are the Bears going to sit there and say, man, we need a left tackle, or we could use a left tackle, but we're not going to take him. We're just going to trade down and let somebody else take him? I mean, maybe. Same with the wide receiver position. I think a lot of Bears fans would be mad if Rome Odunze is sitting there at the 9th overall pick, and the Bears say, we like Odunze, but we'll trade down to, the Saints at what is that, 14, I think they're at, or the Jaguars at 17, or the Bengals at 18. We'll just trade down. We'll get somebody else then and let that team go up and get that wide receiver. And Bears fans are going to be pulling their hair out. Like, why didn't you take Rome Odunze? He was sitting right there for you. And you could make the same argument for Dallas Turner and the Bears having such a big need at the edge rusher spot. So I'm having trouble marrying this idea that, like, Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus talk all the time. We heard him actually at the owners' meetings this week. Matt Eberflus talked about how, like, they grade players in the draft by color, right? The truly elite of the elite top caliber players are blue players. Kind of, people say blue chip, they just call them blue players for Matt Eberflus. And like, Eberflus had a quote this week where he was like, at 1 and at 9, we feel like we have an opportunity to get 2 blue players on our board. Like, if they feel like there's a guy there that they cannot miss on, that they just absolutely have to have, I don't think they're going to trade down. And if that's Dallas Turner, or it's Joe Alt, or it's Rome Odunze, and they're sitting there with the 9th overall pick, are they going to be willing to trade down? Like, it was one thing last year when they traded down one spot from 9 to 10 with the Philadelphia Eagles because they knew the Eagles wanted Jalen Carter, and the Bears didn't view Jalen Carter as that blue caliber player because of the off-the-field concerns there, I think mostly. And they knew they could move down one spot. They knew who the Eagles wanted, and they could still get their blue-ranked offensive tackle in Darnell Wright last year. So sure, could the Bears presumably trade from 9 to 10 again with the Jets? And but the Jets also need a wide receiver and an offensive tackle. So if the wide receiver, the tackle's there, that's likely who the Jets would be swapping picks with you for. So then would you be moving back one to take who else? I mean, I guess if 2 of those players, if somehow Dallas Turner and Joe Alt were available, or Joe Alt and Rome Odunze were available, and you could trade down one spot and still be guaranteed one or the other, like, sure, that's kind of the easiest scenario. But the main scenario you see here is if the Bears are going to trade down from 9, they're going to have to pass on a player they will grade as a blue caliber player, most likely, at a position that they could really use the draft pick. I'm not saying that means that it's impossible, that they're not going to trade down. No, but it does make it harder. That's why I say, like, it's the problem with trading down. It's not the reason that they're for sure not going to trade down, but it's a problem when it comes to the Bears trading down. They're competing with all these other teams want the edge rusher, the offensive tackle, and the wide receiver. It's 3 of the most valuable positions in football, and it's what teams would want to trade up for. So then if you trade down from 9, you're missing out on your opportunity to get some of those top guys there, but you could still get some really valuable draft capital for the Bears that need draft picks, and you could still land good players at those positions later on in the first round, just not the elite guys. So I want to go through what the Bears could get in a trade down, depending on how far they go, and then also what players they could target, depending on how far they move down, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number 1 sportsbook. Now's a great time to get in on the action because new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So you bet $5 on anything on FanDuel, any sport. And if that bet is successful, not only do you get the winnings for your $5 bet, but they're going to add an extra $200 of bonus bets into your account that you can use on point spreads, money lines, who's going to win the whole tournament, or A bunch of NFL draft prop bets just landed on FanDuel on which players each team is going to take with the first 8 picks in the draft, what position certain teams are going to draft this year. I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can bet on this upcoming draft, and you can use those bonus bucks after your first winning $5 bet. To claim those $200 in bonus bets, just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops till they cut down the nets. The Chicago Bears showed us last year that they could trade down from the 9th overall pick. Certainly Ryan Poles has a propensity to want to acquire more draft capital, especially as the team sits here as of today with only 4 picks in this year's draft. And one of those picks is already earmarked for Caleb Williams. So only three other picks to add other players in this team. Like Ryan Poles, in theory, should want to acquire more picks. And the best way to do so is trading down in the first round, because once you get to your 3rd round pick, you're really going to acquire later picks than that. But ideally, you want to acquire picks in the 2nd and or 3rd and or 4th round with a potential trade down. And your ability to do so depends only on how far you're willing to then go down from the 9th overall pick. And with any of these sort of trade discussions, it's a two-way street. The other team is going to need to want to move up to 9. But as you go through like some of the teams picking after the Bears, the Jets at 11 the Jets at 10 could use a wide receiver or a tackle. The Vikings at 11 could use a cornerback, or if the Vikings end up trading up and then another team trades down, it could be a wide receiver team there. The Broncos need a corner or an edge. The Raiders could use a tackle or a corner. The Saints could use an offensive lineman or a receiver. The Colts could go up for a corner or an edge rusher. There's a lot of different teams there that they don't have the exact same need, but some combination of the players that might be available when the Chicago Bears are on the clock. I was looking back through the last decade or so of NFL draft trades to try and get a sense of, okay, what have these picks been traded for recently, to give us a sense of what the real value might be. Like everyone can use the NFL draft trade charts that Jimmy Johnson put together a few decades ago. And that's a decent starting point, but it's not always truly reflective of the value of certain picks based on the value of certain players. And when a team gets desperate, they're willing to give up more. So the math on the draft pick trade chart isn't always perfect. So I don't like to overly rely on that. I prefer to look at historical context for okay, what is the actual real world value in trades for these draft picks, as opposed to what the chart says historically the value, quote unquote, should be. The funny thing is, when you look back in the last, again, I wasn't going to go back crazy far, but I went over the last 10 drafts, I think. The number 9 pick hasn't been traded all that much. It's one of the rare spots up there, but 10 gets traded all the time. And so you have to kind of equate the value of saying, okay, the 9th pick and the 10th pick are going to be pretty similar in value. So when we talk about previous trades where someone traded to 10, I mean, the Bears would be expecting something relatively similar for the 9th pick. 2 years ago, the Eagles traded from 12 to 10. So up 2 spots, not to 9, but to 10, but up 2 spots from 12. It was the trade up for the wide receiver Devonta Smith from Alabama. They gave up a 3rd round pick to go up just 2 spots into the top 10 for a wide receiver. So that could be, I don't know, that would be too much for the Jets to go 1 spot for a wide receiver. But if you were looking at a team, I guess none of the other teams right behind the Bears need a wide receiver, but you get the point, right? Even just to go up a couple of spots, it was a 3rd round pick just a couple of years ago. But if you think back a little bit farther, 2016, the Chicago Bears traded up to the 9th overall pick from the 11th overall pick, 2 spots to draft, for those of you playing along at home, you guessed it, Leonard Floyd. In 2016, the Bears traded up 2 spots from 11 to 9 with the Buccaneers, and they gave up a 4th round pick to move up 2 spots in the top 10. So the value there is somewhere between a 3rd round pick and a 4th round pick to go down just a couple of spots from 9. We're talking 2 to 3, 1 to 4 spots, maybe more like 1 to 3 spots. It kind of depends, okay, does that team have an early 4th round pick versus a late 3rd round pick, or could you do a combination there of a 4th and a 5th, or 2 4ths instead of a 3rd? That's kind of what it comes down to. If you're looking at the Bears moving from 9 anywhere to 11, 12, or 13, it's going to be a 3rd round pick type of compensation. Now, the farther down you go, it's 3rd round pick plus more. The closer to 9 you are, it might be close to a 3rd round pick, but 2 4ths, or a 3rd, and the Bears throw in a future late round pick or something to kind of balance it out. But something around a 3rd round pick is what the Bears can get to move down just a couple of spots. But you look back in 2018, to move down 5 spots, from 10 to 15 in 2018, it was a third round pick and a fifth round pick. The Cardinals gave up a third and a fifth to move up from 15 to 10 to draft Josh Rosen. So it's not like it instantly jumps up to a second round pick. You can move down 5 spots and it's still only a third plus some change. Like, I think the threshold for where it starts to become really like a second round pick is what you're going to get if you trade is about like 8 or 9 or 10 picks down. When you start to get to the late teens, like if the Bears went from 9 to 17, 18, 19 in that range, maybe even 16, it kind of depends, but in that 16 to 20 range, that's when the Bears would get a second round pick. If they traded down, let me double check the draft order here. I almost have it memorized. If they traded down to the Seahawks at 16, maybe they might not get a second from the Seattle Seahawks because they don't have a second round pick this year. So it would have to be like a third and some change. But like the 17th pick is the Jaguars, the 18 is the Bengals, 19 the Rams, 20 is the Steelers. Like if you're going to go down about that far, you're starting at a second round pick and probably adding a little bit more as you get closer to 20. Because back in 2019, the Steelers traded up from 20 to 10. So not 20 to 9, but 20 to 10, 10 spots was for a second round pick and a future third round pick when they traded up for Devin Bush in that draft, a linebacker. So if you went like 10 spots to 20, or I guess if the Bears went 11 spots to 20, right, you'd ask for a second round pick plus a future third round pick is kind of the value that you're looking for there. I guess it could be a second and a current fourth, like something like that, second and a little bit more once you start going 10 spots and above. The real big haul down that we've seen from outside of the top 20 to inside of the top 10, the most recent one really, to the end of the top 10, was the Patrick Mahomes trade in 2017 when the Chiefs went from the 27th pick up to number 10. Now, would the Bears trade down from 9 all the way to 27? I mean, that's the Arizona Cardinals right now, and the Cardinals might want to move up and get another top 10 caliber player. Like, the Cardinals have, funny enough, like the Cardinals have the kind of draft capital to try and make a big move like this. I feel like 27 would be too far for Ryan Poles personally, and too far for, I think, the Chicago Bears fans in general wouldn't be happy moving down all the way to 27. But in that Patrick Mahomes trade, the Chiefs gave up a third rounder and a future first to go up and get Patrick Mahomes there, which is actually pretty darn good value. I mean, the Bears didn't give up a ton less than that to move up for Justin Fields in that trade. That was when they moved up to 11, actually, from like, what was it, 15 or 16 to 11? So like the quarterback trades can kind of skew things a little bit, but you can kind of get a sense of like, okay, if you move down a little, you're getting a third round pick. If you move down a nice chunk, closer to, if you move down 1 to 5 spots, you're getting around a third round pick. If you move down 5 to 10 spots, you're getting a second round pick plus more. There's obviously like wiggle room here. And if you're going more than 10 spots, then it's like a second round pick and more, a second and a third, or a second and a future draft pick. Like that's when you start to really get more and more draft capital there. So that kind of gives you a sense of like, okay, how far should the Bears go based on how much compensation you might be looking for? And obviously, again, it would depend on one of those teams being willing to move up and give up that much to move for that player. But in our personal mock draft simulator machines in our head, how far down would I be willing to go if I'm the Chicago Bears? Well, do I want a second round pick and a third round pick? Like would I go down 10 spots if it got me 2 more day 2 draft picks from another team? I think I probably would, because I think you have to kind of also judge it then on what players are going to be there, or how confident are you that certain players are still going to be on the board or not on the board when you trade down, depending on how far you trade down. And the farther down you go, the less chance you have to land one of the better players that you might like. So we'll look at, in each of those kind of ranges, a little trade down, a medium trade down, or a big trade down, which players we might be able to reasonably expect could still be on the board at those spots, to kind of get a sense of where we might be comfortable and where might feel a little bit too far. That's next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. Whether it's sports, music, theater shows, comedy, you name it, they've got it all on Gametime. I'm actually going to a comedy show on Friday, and I got my tickets on my Gametime app, because Gametime lets you see your view from your seat. So you're never going to get a bad seat in the house. And they've got all-in pricing. So you're not getting added fees at the end that end up making the tickets cost way more than you thought you would when you started the ticket buying process. And I trust their best price guarantee, that I know if I could find the same tickets somewhere else for a lower price, then they would credit me 110% of the difference. I really do love Gametime, and I use it all the time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. The Chicago Bears can still land an edge rusher, an offensive tackle, a wide receiver, maybe a center, a defensive tackle, if they trade down, right? The 9th overall pick is not their only ability to add a starting edge rusher to pair with Montez Sweat. It's not their only ability to add that key third wide receiver to mix with your veterans, or to add that left tackle to be an upgrade over Braxton Jones. They'll just be less elite prospects, less confident in them, sometimes less high of a ceiling, sometimes less high of a floor. In general, just more risk or more warts, or just less overall talent. Like, you're going to get a lesser player, but that doesn't mean you're going to get a bad player. And it becomes a question of what's more valuable to you. It's a quantity over quality question when it comes to a trade down. Do you need the blue chip left tackle? Or would you rather have Joe Alt, or you trade down and you get another tackle? We'll talk in a second, J.C. Latham from Alabama, plus a second-round pick and a third-round pick that could be another wide receiver and a safety. Like, would you rather have Joe Alt or a tackle, a wide receiver, and a safety? Well, that tackle may never be Joe Alt, but Joe Alt will never be a wide receiver and a safety and a tackle. So, rarely do you have the opportunities to add a tackle like Joe Alt. Rarely do you have the opportunities to add a wide receiver like Rome Odunze, or an edge rusher like Dallas Turner. But if you could trade down and get Laiatu Latu, who you might still think is really good, and get an extra draft pick that can help you get your center of the future, or your safety of the future, or a wide receiver of the future in the second or third round or whatever, like that also seems very intriguing. And that's why Ryan Poles has such a difficult job here. But I want to sort of split this up into a few categories of, like, okay, if the Bears trade down, who could they get? It's obviously dependent on how far they go down. So I'm putting this again, it's sort of like a small trade, a medium trade, or a big trade. If you trade down a couple of spots from 9 into the early teens, 11, 12, 13, I think your primary targets there, I think if you're trading down to the 11, 12, 13 range, we're assuming that Dallas Turner's then gone, Rome Odunze's gone, Joe Alt is gone for sure. So now you're moving to your next tier of guys, and you're hoping that Laiatu Latu from UCLA, he's my second best edge rusher in this draft. I would be really happy with him in the early teens of this draft. I think he's a day one starting defensive end in this Bears defense who's already a really polished pass rusher. He would be a great pick in the teens, the early teens there. If you still want an offensive tackle, Olu Fashanu, I think, would be a great fit. Like, no, he's not as good as Joe Alt, but and yes, I think he got hurt at the combine, but I don't think it's going to be a major thing for him. But the Penn State offensive tackle, he's got a much longer first name, but we call him Olu Fashanu for sure. And he's a starting left tackle, like day one starting left tackle. Not as perfect of a prospect as Joe Alt, but very, very good. I don't know that there's a wide receiver after the big three. I wouldn't take a wide receiver in the early teens there, but Brock Bowers could be an option there as a tight end who also is going to play some receiver. Or you could go defensive tackle there, like Byron Murphy from Texas, I think would be a fine pick in the teens, like interior pass rusher to add to this defensive line. It doesn't have to be an edge rusher, but ideally it'd be an edge rusher, but you can always use more pass rushers anywhere in the line. So if I'm moving down a couple spots, it's some combination there, right? Byron Murphy, Laiatu Latu, Olu Fashanu, Brock Bowers, like any of those guys would be solid fits and should, in theory, be available for you in those early teen spots. If you go a little bit farther down to the mid to late teens, your 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 type range in the draft. So at this point, you're trading down for probably a second round pick to pair with whoever you end up picking here. There's still edge rushers to like, interior pass rusher to like, offensive tackles to like, and you start to get back into the wide receiver range here. Like in the mid to late teens, I'd take Jared Verse from Florida State as your starting day one edge rusher opposite Montez Sweat. Like, I don't think he's as good as Latu. I don't think he's as good as Dallas Turner, but he's still a starting caliber, like day one starter edge rusher and you're adding a second round pick while still moving down and landing somebody like that. I think the same thing is true for Johnny Newton at Villanova. Like, that's a good range for him. I know the injury thing is a question there that, you got to make sure you're comfortable with. And same with Latu and Olu Fashanu and a lot of these guys. But like, high quality interior pass rusher, absolutely sign me up. If you want to go tackle, I mentioned earlier, J.C. Latham from Alabama would be in this range for sure. And you start to get in the range of tackles where you can kind of pick your flavor there. If you think Talise Fuaga from Oregon State can play tackle and not just guard in the NFL, you could take him there. Some people think he's going to be a guard there. Same with the Washington tackle. I always want to say his name like Fashanu, and I end up starting to get them mixed up. But they both have sort of those longer last names. It's Fautanu. It's like Fashanu and Fautanu from Washington. Is he a tackle? Is he a guard? But he could be a guy that you like in that range. Like, you could easily go back to late teens and still get a left tackle. And this is where I think at wide receiver, somebody like Brian Thomas from LSU comes back into the conversation, the running mate of Malik Neighbors. He's got great size and some good vertical speed down the sideline. I mean, 6'4", 205. I mean, he really can be that big-time vertical threat for your offense and be, a long-term playmaker for the Bears. Like, any of those guys in this late teens range, an edge rusher like Verse, a defensive tackle like Newton, an offensive tackle like Latham, or a wide receiver like Brian Thomas, like, you could trade down 10 spots from 9 to 19 and probably still land at least one of those guys, if not have multiple swings at those types of guys there. If you go even farther, you go the big jump down to the early 20s, right? 20, 21, 22, 23. That's the range I would consider the Oregon center, Jackson Powers Johnson. He's just that good. Like, I don't want to draft a center in the first round if I'm the Bears. I want a player who's going to be a slightly bigger impact in year one, and I don't think the Bears will, but I would take him there in the 20s. Absolutely. There's going to be offensive tackles like Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, Amarius Mims from Georgia. Like, both of those guys are a little bit more of project offensive tackles. But so was Darnell Wright. He was not a well-refined offensive tackle. He made mistakes as a rookie, and Guyton and Mims are going to need some development, but they're both humongous athletic freaks at the tackle position, kind of like Darnell Wright. And you'd have two absolute freaks at offensive tackle if you traded down to the 20s and got a second and a third round pick and still got a left tackle. Or you could still get an edge rusher like Chop Robinson from Penn State, maybe even Darius Robinson from Missouri. It's a little early for him, but I really like him a lot as a prospect. Or a wide receiver like A.D. Mitchell from Texas, the speedster. Like, you can trade down in the 20s, still find a tackle, still find an edge rusher, still find a wide receiver. None of those guys are on the same caliber as the big three that we keep talking about. Dallas Turner, Joe Alt, Rome Odunze. Like, those are the blue chips. But if you're willing to trade down and say, the quantity of being able to hit multiple needs with multiple picks at multiple positions that I want to address in the draft, instead of really concentrating all that in one guy with the 9th overall pick, like, it's really enticing to still trade down and get one of these guys that you like. And I think what it'll come down to Ryan Poles is really the individual evaluations here. How far apart is Joe Alt from Olu Fashanu for them? Do they see Joe Alt as just out of this world, and then Fashanu and the other tackles are just not that great, and it's Alt or nothing? Same thing at wide receiver. Like, is Rome Odunze so great and they don't really like Brian Thomas or A.D. Mitchell and say, we got to get a wide receiver at 8 or else we're not going to get one at all? Or Dallas Turner, right? Maybe they're scared of Latu's neck and they're not big. The Jared Verse doesn't have enough of the size they're looking for, or whatever. And they say, well, we got to get Turner at 8 or else we're not going to find this edge rusher. At 9, or we're not going to find this edge rusher. Like, that, it all comes down to like how they view it. They might say, oh, you know what? Actually, Dallas Turner and Latu are really close in our books. So if we can trade down and still land Latu, we feel like we're getting a top 10 player later in the draft, and that's great. Or if they look at it and say, man, Olu Fashanu and Joe Alt are really close in our grades, so we could trade down 4 spots, still get Fashanu, and still feel like we got a top 10 offensive tackle, like, great. Like, it's really going to be how their draft board stacks with these individual players, how strongly they feel about these guys at the top versus how strongly they feel about the guys more in the middle of the first round. So I think the ideal strategy is trade down and still land a top guy. That's what every team would love to do on draft day, but it's much, much easier said than done. You need other teams to participate in terms of giving you a lot to trade up and then not have teams also take those guys that you like after you trade down. So it's a risky game, and that's why we love the NFL draft. That's why we love doing mock drafts and the mock draft simulators that let us do trades. Like, that's really the fun stuff here. I'd love to hear what you want the Bears to do at 9, how you feel about the possibility of a trade down, and who you would target if the Chicago Bears were trading down and you were in charge. Let us know in the comments here on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel. You can tweet us at Locked On Bears, or you can post in the Locked On Bears Facebook group. However you do it, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. And subscribing would be a great birthday present for me if you're not already subscribed to the podcast. If you are, then you've already made my dreams come true and my birthday wishes. I didn't have to blow out the candles because the wish already came true. So I appreciate you for tuning in every single day, making Locked On Bears your first listen. And even on my birthday, I still make sure I find time for you to bear down.